Welcome to another episode of RNV Talks, in which we will explore different aspects of Roma history, culture, and contemporary issues. This podcast is released as part of the EUROMIJA project implemented by the Roma National Council of Croatia within the framework of the European Solidarity Corps. Let's see what the team has prepared for us today.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today we're going to discuss a topic that many people have probably never heard about: Romani law. When we think about law, we usually imagine constitutions, courts, judges, police officers, and governments. We think about the legal systems that exist within modern states. But did you know that many communities throughout history have also developed their own legal traditions, and among them, Roma communities?
Before we begin, let's clarify something important. Today's episode is not about replacing national laws or creating separate states. Instead, we're talking about the traditional rules, values, and methods of conflict resolution that have existed within Roma communities for generations. Understanding these traditions can help us better understand Roma culture and challenge many stereotypes that still exist today.
So let's start with a simple question. What exactly do we mean when we talk about Romani law?
Well, Romani law refers to the customs, rules, and traditions that have historically regulated relationships within Roma communities. Like many legal systems, its purpose is to maintain order, resolve disputes, and protect the values that are important to that community. However, unlike national legal systems, Romani law has traditionally been passed down orally rather than through written documents.
And that creates an interesting challenge because these rules were mainly transmitted through generations by word of mouth. Studying them is much more difficult than studying written legal codes. Researchers cannot simply open a book and find a complete collection of Romani laws.
There's another important reason why studying Romani law can be complicated. When people say Roma, they are often referring to many different communities living across different countries. That means there isn't necessarily one single Romani legal system. Different communities may share certain values while having different customs and practices.
Exactly. So rather than speaking about one universal Romani law, it may be more accurate to speak about Romani legal traditions.
Some listeners might be wondering why this topic matters. After all, if national laws already do exist, why should we study traditional legal systems?
One reason is that law is much more than government institutions. Every society develops ways to regulate behavior, resolve conflicts, and define acceptable conduct. Studying different legal traditions helps us understand how different communities organize social life.
And it can also help reduce prejudice. For centuries, Roma people have often been portrayed through negative stereotypes. Some people have incorrectly assumed that Roma communities are somehow disconnected from social rules or legal principles. The existence of rich and complex legal traditions directly challenges these stereotypes.
In the early 2000s, a group of scholars led by Walter O. Weirauch undertook an important effort to study Romani legal traditions more systematically. Their research was eventually published in a book called Gypsy Law, Romani Legal Traditions and Cultures. The goal was to bring attention to a topic that had often been overlooked in academic research.
The researchers conducted interviews and examined practices in Roma communities located in different parts of the world, including Spain, Northern Europe, and the United States. Their findings revealed both diversity and common values across many communities.
One of the most interesting findings involved concepts of purity and pollution. According to many traditional interpretations, the human body is symbolically divided by the waist. So everything above the waist is associated with purity, while everything below is associated with pollution.
Now, when we hear the word pollution, it's important not to think about uncleanliness in the modern sense of the word.
Exactly. In many cultures around the world, including some religious traditions, ideas of purity and pollution are symbolic rather than physical. They help communities distinguish between things that are considered appropriate or inappropriate, sacred or ordinary, acceptable or taboo.
So these rules were not necessarily judgments about whether a person was good or bad. Instead, they reflected a broader cultural understanding of order, respect, and social relationships.
And this is something that can sometimes be difficult for outsiders to understand. If we look at these customs only through our own cultural perspective, they may seem unusual. But anthropologists often remind us that every society has traditions and unwritten rules that make perfect sense within their own cultural context.
Understanding these ideas doesn't mean that we have to adopt them ourselves. Rather, it helps us appreciate how different communities have developed their own systems of values and social norms over time. And these ideas influenced various aspects of everyday life. For example, in some communities, pregnancy and the period immediately after birth were traditionally associated with ritual pollution. However, it's important to remember that these customs have changed over time. As Roma communities interacted more closely with wider society, many traditional rules became less strict.
This reminds us that cultures are not static. Like all societies, Roma communities adapt and evolve.
Another fascinating aspect of Romani law concerns conflict resolution. So it's important to ask, if there are no state courts involved, well, how are disputes settled?
In many Roma communities, disputes have traditionally been addressed through institutions known as CRIS. A CRIS can be understood as a community court that hears cases and helps resolve conflicts.
Now, when we hear the word court, many of us immediately imagine a large building, judges wearing robes, lawyers presenting arguments, and police officers enforcing decisions. But a CRIS traditionally works quite differently.
That's right. A CRIS is not simply a smaller version of a state court. It developed within Roma communities themselves and reflects their own customs, values, and ways of resolving disputes.
And it's important to remember that there is no single model. Different Roma communities have different traditions, and the exact structure of a CRIS may vary from place to place. However, researchers have identified some common features.
For example, cases are often had by respected members of the community, usually elders or individuals known for their wisdom, experience, and good reputation. These people are expected to understand community customs and to be trusted by those involved in the dispute.
In that sense, authority comes less from holding an official government position and more from having earned the respect of the community.
And that raises an interesting question. What kinds of disputes would actually be brought before a CRIS?
Well, historically, many cases involve disagreements between families, accusations of dishonesty, disputes over debts, conflicts related to marriage, or allegations that someone had violated important community norms. The goal was often not simply to determine who was right or wrong, but to restore harmony within the community.
That's an important difference. Modern legal systems often focus on determining whether a law has been broken and what punishment should follow. A CRIS, on the other hand, has traditionally placed significant emphasis on repairing relationships and restoring trust.
Let's imagine a simple example. Suppose two families are involved in a dispute over money that one side claims was never repaid. Instead of immediately turning to a state court, community members might ask a CRIS to hear both sides of the story. Witnesses could be invited to speak, evidence might be discussed, and respected elders would consider the facts before reaching a decision.
The objective would not necessarily be to create a lengthy legal process, but rather it would be to find a solution that the community considers fair and that allows everyone to move forward.
Another question many listeners may be asking is, if there are no police officers enforcing the decision, why would anyone follow it?
The answer lies in the importance of community reputation. In many traditional Roma communities, belonging to the community and maintaining good relationships with others has enormous social value. So, a person who openly ignores the decision of a CRIS risks losing trust, respect, and social standing.
Or, in other words, community pressure often serves a role similar to law enforcement. People comply not because they fear imprisonment, but because they value their place within the community.
This might sound unusual to some listeners, but social pressure plays a role in many societies. Even outside formal legal systems, people often follow rules because they care about reputation, relationships, and acceptance by others.
Of course, this doesn't mean that a CRIS replaces national courts. Modern states have legal systems that apply to everyone living within their territory, and serious criminal offenses are handled by state authorities, not by community institutions.
And that's a crucial point, because the CRISs traditionally function alongside national legal systems rather than replacing them. And its primary role has been to address internal community disputes and preserve social cohesion.
Researchers studying Romani law have often been fascinated by this system because it demonstrates that communities can develop sophisticated methods of resolving conflicts even without the institutions we usually associate with modern law.
And perhaps that's one of the most important lessons, because when we hear the word law, we often think only about governments or official institutions. But throughout history, many societies have created their own mechanisms for justice, mediation, and conflict resolution. The CRIS is one example of how Roma communities developed their own approaches to these universal human challenges.
Unlike modern state courts, however, these institutions generally focus on disputes involving members of the Roma community itself. Conflicts involving non Roma individuals are usually handled through national legal systems.
And what's particularly interesting is how decisions are actually enforced. Instead of relying on police officers or formal legal sanctions, community pressure often plays an important role. People are expected to respect decisions because maintaining their reputation and standing within the community matters greatly.
And according to researchers, decisions of the CRIS are often regarded as final and binding by community members.
One especially interesting development has been the interaction between Romani legal traditions and national legal systems. Researchers observed that, in some cases in the United States, state courts began paying greater attention to Roma dispute resolution practices.
And this represented a significant shift, actually, because rather than viewing Roma traditions as irrelevant, legal institutions started recognizing them as an important part of cultural identity.
Studying Romani law is not simply an academic exercise, it can help build greater understanding between communities. When we learn about how different groups organize social life, we become less likely to rely on stereotypes and assumptions.
It also encourages us to question a very common idea that there is only one correct way for a legal system to function. Different societies have developed different approaches to justice, responsibility, and social cohesion.
That doesn't mean all systems are identical, but it does remind us that law can take many forms. Sometimes it is written in constitutions and legal codes. Sometimes it is preserved through customs, traditions, and community practices.
And now, as we reach the end of today's episode, one important message stands out. Romani legal traditions demonstrate that Roma communities possess rich systems of values, responsibilities, and mechanisms of resolving conflicts.
Understanding these traditions helps us move beyond simplistic and often harmful stereotypes.
And perhaps most importantly, studying different legal traditions encourages greater respect for cultural diversity and inclusion, because understanding one another is often the first step towards building stronger and more tolerant societies.
Thank you for listening to the episode of RNV Talks. And we hope that today's discussion offered a new perspective on law, culture, and the importance of understanding different ways that communities organize social life.
Until next time!
Goodbye, everybody.